Hello.
Hello.
My name's Hope, and I'm an Ages of Change youth rep, and I'm with Alison, who's going to tell us a bit about her justice journey. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Alison Walker. I've been a Methodist minister for 19 years and actually have always been part of the Methodist Church. I was one of the people who grew up going to Methodist Sunday school and Methodist Church and all the Methodist youth things that happened back then.
So would you like to tell us and show us about your artifact?
Yes, I'd like to share with you a cartoon that I think was one of the first things I remember about injustice. My mum was the Now magazine secretary for Sittingbourne Methodist Church. This was a publication from the Overseas Missions Department, as it used to be called. And I would read through these stories of the World Church. And one day in that magazine was a cartoon which really struck me. This cartoon, you'll see there's this fat guy eating away at a full table and a small child asking for some food, and the dialogue that happens, the boy says, "I'm hungry," and the man chomping his food replies, "Stop talking politics." Now, I grew up in a nice area of Kent, fairly averagely middle class, and at the time very white. And it was through the church really that I learned more about the world, about being part of a world church and what that meant for some people who live in other countries. And I remember using that cartoon for one of my guide badges and trying to explain to people how poverty and injustice are linked in that way. But that was just one little bit along the way, but it's a cartoon that I still find very powerful. I've no idea who produced it or if it was original to the magazine, but you can find it online.
Thank you. That's an incredible cartoon. How does this artifact symbolize and your faith journey and your justice journey?
I think for me, the faith and the justice have always been wrapped up together. That being a Christian for me isn't only about being a follower of Jesus in an immediate and personal sense. It's also about being part of that community of the kingdom of God that should bring us justice and joy. And this was something that in my teenage years definitely brought me, oh my goodness, justice and joy. I can barely believe that we wore these things, but MAYC, Methodist Association of Youth Clubs, was a really important part. And I'm going to have to take it off, every year at London Weekend, the World Action Team featured. And there were so many things which really moved me in my heart as well as my mind. One year there was we did the Survive Alive project, 1996, in support of tribal peoples, and some of the tribal leaders came to London and spoke in the Royal Albert Hall about the impact upon them and their children of the destruction of the rainforest and their traditional lands. And one of them spoke about the suicides amongst their young people. And again, it made me realize that justice isn't something that's a concept out there. The lack of justice is something that affects people's family lives. Their hopes and dreams for the future can be wiped out. So seeing justice and belonging to the kingdom and faith just all get wrapped up for me.
That's just fascinating. Would you say that the cartoon was the very start of your justice journey, and that encouraged you within the church?
I think the cartoon is one of those things I remember from quite early on in my teenage years, and for me it's the way that it points to that combination of poverty and greed and injustice, and the fact it was in a church magazine just made sense to me. It is in the church I find that kind of intersection of all these issues, and I don't think you can take one bit out. I'm definitely not somebody who says the church shouldn't talk about politics. Absolutely, we should talk about politics, and we should listen to the voices of the people who have that first-hand experience of injustice rather than dismissing what they're saying, which I think is also what that cartoon might be hinting at, listening to that young guy who's experiencing hunger.
How would you say that being involved in all these things impacted your faith and how you like developed your faith, if that makes sense of the question.
I think I've been very fortunate that the church has given me lots of chances to do things that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I've learned a lot from the people that I've met along the way, who themselves have been people who've combined faith and action and political understandings. So I popped my cancel the cancel the debt t-shirt back there from the Jubilee 2000 coalition campaigns that lots of people were involved with. But I was very fortunate. I was asked to go to the World Council of Churches in Harare in 1998. They needed to fill a place that was for a young woman, a lay young woman. So I was asked to go at last minute. And there I spent a lot of time talking with the other young people from around the world and being part of some cancelling the debt conversations, listening to people describing the impact upon their own countries and societies about the levels of debt that their countries were under at the time, and learning something about the historic and political reasons for the debt in the first place, and participating in some campaigning actions, and all of that within the umbrella of lots of other theological and ecumenical discussions about how we might understand Jesus, about how the Spirit was working, about how churches relate to each other. So it's never for me been one isolated thing, but always coming together. And then I studied theology, first of all at university, but also for ministerial training. And when I read about liberation theology, it made sense of some of those strands for me. So again, liberation theology is about helping people find freedom, exposing those structures which hold things down and repress people, and how we can liberate the structures as well as help people free themselves.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting, and thank you so much for sharing your justice journey and all that. Yeah.
And thank you to MAYC for opening my eyes when I was a teenager to how our world really is, but also how it can be, and how we're still trying to make it a different place.
Yeah, it sounded like a wonderful experience to have, and really empowering.
It was a good time, but I know that continues through youth conference and through Generate now. So we're still trying to help young people catch a vision of God's world.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Hope.